Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take a closer look at moments that have shaped the worlds we're interested in. Today, we're going back to 2012 and diving deep into a truly explosive event in video game history, the controversy that surrounded the ending of Mass Effect 3.
Oh yeah, definitely a cultural touchstone for so many gamers. And well, a fascinating case study in narrative expectations, really. Just to bring everyone up to speed quickly, the Mass Effect trilogy puts you in the boots of Commander Shepard. Your mission, basically unite a wildly diverse galaxy against the Reapers. These are ancient, highly advanced synthetic life forms that follow this terrifying 50,000-year cycle of, well, harvesting all sentient organic life. So by the time we get to the third game, the Reaper invasion is very much happening. It's here.
Right. And for this deep dive, you've provided some really interesting material. We've got excerpts from a PC Gamer article reflecting on the controversy like a full decade later, and also a very detailed Wikipedia page outlining the entire saga. Our goal today for you listening is to really unpack why this particular ending triggered such a powerful reaction, how the folks at BioWare responded to what became, well, a massive outcry, and what the lasting impact has been on the gaming landscape. Think of this as your fast track to understanding a truly pivotal moment in interactive storytelling. So let's get right into it. What were those initial player reactions? What were the core issues that really set off such a strong wave of disappointment?
Well, an immediate aftermath was marked by widespread disappointment. That's putting it mildly, really. A central point of contention was the feeling that the multitude of choices players had, painstakingly made across 3 very long and involved games. The relationships they'd built, the allegiances they'd forged, the sacrifices they'd made, ultimately felt kind of insignificant in those final moments.
Oh, okay, so it felt like it didn't matter.
Yeah, exactly. It was as if this grand tapestry of player decisions had just been funneled into a very narrow and for many deeply unsatisfying conclusion. And this lack of perceived closure was compounded by what were seen as significant plot holes and just inconsistencies in the narrative logic of the ending itself.
The PC Gamer piece really underscores this, doesn't it? Describing the ending as an overstuffed 15-minute climax that took some bold, perhaps reckless risks. And it doesn't mince words about the fan reaction, calling it apoplectic. It wasn't just like a quiet grumble online, was it? This frustration seemed to really galvanize a significant portion of the player base.
Oh, absolutely. This frustration found a very organized outlet in the Retake Mass Effect campaign. It wasn't just about voicing displeasure. These fans had specific demands for a revised ending. And what was particularly striking was that alongside these calls for change, they also organized a very successful charity drive for Child's Play. They raised an impressive $80,000 before it was eventually stopped.
Wow, 80,000.
Yeah, it really highlights the passion and, the dedication of this gaming community.
It really does. And the reaction wasn't limited to just online campaigns and charitable efforts. It even spilled over into more formal avenues of complaint, which is pretty unusual in the gaming space, right?
That's right. Formal complaints were indeed lodged, including one filed directly with the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC. The core of that complaint revolved around the idea that BioWare hadn't really delivered on promises made about the impact of player choices on the game's outcome. False advertising, essentially.
Right, the whole your choices matter thing.
Exactly. The Better Business Bureau also got involved, with one of their directors suggesting that the game might have falsely advertised the extent to which players could actually shape the final outcome. However, it's important to note, the UK Advertising Standards Authority investigated similar claims. And they ultimately ruled that while the endings might have been disappointing for many, they were technically different enough from each other not to be legally considered misleading.
Okay, so while there weren't maybe major legal repercussions, the message from the fans was certainly loud and clear. How did BioWare initially respond to all this intense pressure?
Initially, as you might expect, there was a degree of defensive-ness. BioWare co-founder Ray Musica publicly acknowledged the feedback, but also pointed to the generally high critical reception the game had received. The reviews were mostly good.
Right, look at the scores, kind of thing.
Sort of, yeah. But he also recognized the sheer intensity of the fan reaction. The PC Gamer article quotes him saying, "Out of respect for our fans, we need to accept the criticism and feedback with humility." Which, as that article points out, was seen by many as a pretty significant shift in how game developers were willing to engage with player criticism at the time.
Interesting.
It suggested a recognition that perhaps, the traditional metrics of critical success weren't the only measures of a game's impact. The player experience mattered hugely.
And that shift in approach led to a very tangible response, didn't it? The announcement and then the release of the extended cut DLC.
Exactly. Just about 3 months after the initial release and the height of the controversy, BioWare announced this free, extended cut, downloadable content. The stated goal was to directly address the core concerns players had raised. This included providing more clarity to some of the more ambiguous aspects of the original endings and attempting to retroactively address some of the more prominent plot holes players had identified.
Like the mass relays blowing up. That seemed like a big...
Yes, that was a key example. The seemingly complete destruction of the mass relay network, which, as many players pointed out, would have had catastrophic and, frankly, illogical consequences for the entire galaxy, stranding everyone. The extended cut also aimed to further explain the motivations and the logic behind the Star Child, that somewhat enigmatic AI that appears at the very end and presents Shepard with the final choices.
Okay, let's delve into those original ending choices for a moment. As presented by the Star Child, what were the options Shepard faced?
Right, so there were 3 primary options presented. First was destroy. This would effectively eliminate the Reaper threat entirely, but at a significant cost. The destruction of all synthetic life in the galaxy.
Which included allies, right? Like the Geth and EDI.
Exactly. Allied races like the Geth, and even Shepard's own AI companion, EDI, who had become a really significant character throughout the trilogy. A tough pill to swallow for many. The second option was control. Here, Shepard would essentially upload their consciousness into a new AI construct to take control of the Reapers, intending to use them as a galactic peacekeeping force.
Which felt very out of character for Shepard. For some people.
Yeah, a pretty drastic shift in character and motivation for Shepard, definitely. And the third was synthesis. This was a more abstract option that involved merging all organic and synthetic life at a fundamental level.
That one always seemed the vaguest.
It really was. This particular choice was often criticized for its lack of clear definition, and it left many players questioning its actual implications. What does that even mean?
And the extended cut then tried to build on these somewhat stark and, for some, unsatisfying choices. Did it change them?
Precisely. It didn't fundamentally change the core choices themselves, no, but it did add layers of context and attempted to show more of the consequences of each decision. It included additional cutscenes during the ending sequence, aiming to provide more emotional resonance to Shepard's final actions. And crucially, it added a montage-based epilogue. This epilogue showed the aftermath of Shepard's choice, depicting the fates of various key supporting characters, different alien species, and even the overall state of the galaxy.
Okay, so showing more what happened next.
Exactly. And these outcomes were designed to be more variable, influenced by the player's decisions made throughout all 3 games and their effective military strength, that score representing how well you gathered allies. The extended cut also tacked on a 4th option, actually, allowing players to simply refuse the Star Child's offer entirely.
Oh, right, the refusal ending.
Yeah, which, as you might imagine, led to a definitive and pretty bleak Reaper victory. Game over, essentially.
And how was this extended cut received? By the community, by critics? Did it manage to, calm the storm?
The reaction was definitely mixed. Some critics and a portion of the fan base did see it as an improvement. They appreciated the added clarity, the attempt to acknowledge the impact of their earlier choices. The Wikipedia page even mentions that the individual who filed the FTC complaint actually expressed satisfaction with the changes that were made.
Oh, really? That's interesting.
Yeah. However, a significant portion of players still felt that it didn't truly address the fundamental issues they had with the original ending. They felt that even with the added context, the core feeling, that their agency over the course of 3 games had been diminished in the final act, that feeling remained.
So, still not quite hitting the mark for everyone.
Pretty much. As a Forbes article cited on Wikipedia put it, for many, it was simply too little, far too late.
This period also saw the rise of some really interesting and elaborate fan theories attempting to make sense of the ending, right? The most prominent was arguably the indoctrination theory. Can you explain that for those who might not be familiar?
Yes, the indoctrination theory. It was fascinating and very popular, a fan-driven interpretation that proposed that Commander Shepard had been gradually brainwashed or indoctrinated by the Reapers throughout the trilogy.
So the ending wasn't real.
That was the idea. The theory suggested that the entire ending sequence presented in the game wasn't reality, but rather a hallucination taking place within Shepard's mind as they battled for control against this Reaper indoctrination. Proponents pointed to various visual cues, narrative inconsistencies, thematic elements throughout the game as evidence. It was quite detailed. In this view, the destroy ending, the red one, was seen as Shepard finally breaking free from the Reaper's influence. The only real choice, maybe.
It was a remarkably detailed and compelling theory. It really speaks to the level of investment and, honestly, the analytical thinking that Mass Effect fans brought to the experience.
What was BioWare's official stance on it? Did they ever acknowledge the indoctrination theory as, like, a possibility?
Well, while the theory certainly captured the imagination of a large segment of the fan base, BioWare consistently maintained that it was not the intended narrative. Chris Hepler, one of the writers on Mass Effect 3, explicitly stated in an interview, "We didn't write that," and that it was never a planned plot point.
Okay, so officially debunked.
Officially, yes. However, Hepler did acknowledge that he found the theory interesting and even expressed support for fans who wanted to explore it further through fan fiction or mods. So while it wasn't considered canon, it definitely became a significant part of the broader conversation surrounding the ending. People still talk about it.
Absolutely. And beyond these grand overarching theories, there were also some more lighthearted and meme-worthy reactions to the ending, weren't there? The emergence of Marauder shields, for example.
Wow.
That's right, Marauder shields. In the final combat encounter, just before the ending sequence really begins, players face this seemingly unremarkable Marauder enemy, just one less guy. For many, this particular enemy became an almost comical symbol of their frustration. Here you were, having fought countless overwhelming foes, gods almost, and this relatively standard enemy became the last obstacle before an ending that many found deeply unsatisfying.
So he became a meme.
Totally. Fans jokingly dubbed him Marauder Shields, imagining him as this final, almost pathetic gatekeeper, stubbornly protecting the controversial conclusion, trying his best. It was a way for the community to collectively vent their feelings through humor and shared absurdity.
It's always interesting how communities use humor to process disappointment. Now, the Wikipedia page also mentioned some of the alternate ending ideas that were considered by the development team, but ultimately didn't make it into the final game. Were there any that stood out to you?
Oh yeah, there were quite a few fascinating concepts they apparently explored. One involved the idea that dark energy was the fundamental reason behind the Reaper's creation. This concept even hinted at a potential alliance between the Citadel races and the Reapers to combat some larger dark energy threat. Which is wild to think about.
Teaming up with the Reapers, wow.
Yeah. Another, referred to as the cyclical ending, drew parallels to Saren's arc from the first Mass Effect. It envisioned a Commander Shepard who had been corrupted by Reaper technology, facing off against a surviving member of their squad.
Ooh, dramatic.
Very. There was also a concept where the elusive man, the Cerberus leader, would undergo a transformation into a Reaper-like creature for a final boss battle. That certainly sounds like it would have been a dramatic encounter.
Those sound like drastically different directions the story could have taken. Were there any alternate ideas that focused more on, say, a strategic or tactical defeat of the Reapers?
Yes, there were a couple that leaned more in that direction. One serious consideration involved luring the Reapers into the mass relay network and then triggering a detonation of the entire network, which would have effectively destroyed the Reapers, but also had the massive consequence of isolating all the different galactic communities for potentially a very long time.
Setting up a very different kind of sequel, essentially.
Exactly. Another idea, which reportedly was favored by one of the writers, involved the Crucible, the superweapon, it being a device that specifically targeted and annihilated objects with a high atomic number, which would include the Reapers and their tech, obviously, but also potentially even Shepard themselves, depending on their cybernetics, presenting a very bittersweet victory.
A sacrifice ending, basically.
Right. And there was also an idea centered around a trapped Reaper queen hidden within the Citadel who would present Shepard with a set of choices. Choices that were thematically similar to what ended up in the final game, actually. Control, destroy, that kind of thing.
Huh. So some core ideas persisted.
It seems like it. It really highlights the diverse range of possibilities they were exploring, even if they landed where they did.
It certainly does. So looking at the bigger picture now, what do you think has been the long-term impact of this whole Mass Effect 3 ending controversy on the broader gaming landscape?
Well, for one thing, as that PC Gamer article points out, it's often cited as a key example of fan insurrection. The power of a united and vocal player base to actually influence game developers. It's become a sort of blueprint. Other fan communities have looked to it when feeling dissatisfied with the direction of a beloved franchise.
We've seen comparisons drawn to other instances of controversial endings, right? Like the final season of Game of Thrones.
Exactly. Game of Thrones similarly generated intense fan reaction when the narrative didn't conclude in a way that resonated with a significant portion of the audience. Very similar discussions happened.
And that influence has manifested in more than just online discussions and petitions, hasn't it? Like the creation of fan-made modifications to the game.
Oh, absolutely. The modding community really stepped up. They created various modifications with the specific aim of altering the ending to better align with fan expectations. Mods like Priority, Earth Overhaul made significant changes to the final mission, incorporating new cutscenes, dialogue, even allowing players to fight alongside previously unavailable allies like the Geth if you'd saved them.
Giving players more control back, in a way.
Sort of, yeah. And perhaps the most direct response was the creation of the Happy Ending mod. It essentially removed some of the most controversial elements of the original ending, like the Star Child sequence and the destruction of the mass relays, and created a version where the Destroy ending had far fewer negative consequences for the galaxy. Shepard could survive more easily, EDI and the Geth were fine.
And that's still around, even for the new version.
It is. It's quite remarkable that this mod has even been updated to be compatible with the recent Mass Effect Legendary Edition. Shows the demand is still there.
It really speaks to the enduring passion for the trilogy. Were there any wider industry impacts that have been attributed, at least in part, to this controversy?
Well, it's been suggested, maybe cynically, that the intense negative reaction surrounding the Mass Effect 3 ending played a significant role in Electronic Arts, the publisher, being named Worst Company in America by Consumerist for 2 consecutive years, 2012 and 2013.
Ouch. That's quite a title.
Yeah. While there were certainly other factors contributing to that public perception, online passes, microtransactions, other EA things, the widespread dissatisfaction with the game's conclusion undoubtedly didn't help their public image at the time. On a more optimistic note, some members of the BioWare team have expressed hope that the release of the Mass Effect Legendary Edition, which includes a slightly refined version of Mass Effect 3 and the extended cut, that maybe it might lead to a reassessment of the ending by a new generation of players, or perhaps even a shift in perspective from some of the original critics, now that tempers have cooled.
Maybe seeing it in context all at once.
Perhaps, or just with the passage of time.
And ultimately looking back, what do you think the Mass Effect 3 ending controversy ultimately tells us about the relationship between players and the games they invest so much time and emotion into?
I think it really illuminated the inherent tension that can exist between player agency and authorial control in these big narrative-driven games. It's a tough balance. Mass Effect had built its entire foundation on the promise that player choices mattered, that they would shape the story and the fate of the galaxy. When the ending appeared to disregard or minimize the impact of those choices, it understandably led to a sense of betrayal for many players who had become deeply invested in their version of Commander Shepard and the intricate web of relationships and decisions they had forged over hundreds of hours.
Yeah, you feel ownership after that long.
Exactly. It sparked a really crucial conversation within the gaming community and the industry about what players expect from games that emphasize choice and consequence. And, maybe more importantly, just how much influence the community should have on the creative vision of the developers. Where's that line?
So, to bring our deep dive to a close then, the Mass Effect 3 ending controversy was clearly a truly landmark event in gaming. It powerfully demonstrated the strength of fan expectations and the constantly evolving, sometimes messy, relationship between players and the creators of the games they love. It forced a very public discussion about the meaning of player choice in interactive narratives, the crucial importance of narrative satisfaction for players, and the increasing influence, for better or worse, of the gaming community on the creative process.
Absolutely. And that leaves us with a final thought for you, our listener. Considering the intense reaction we've discussed and the eventual changes implemented by BioWare, does this event ultimately represent a positive shift in the industry? Does it empower players and give them a more significant voice in the development process? Or, on the other hand, does it potentially set a limiting precedent for artistic vision and the creative freedom of game developers? Are creators now afraid to make bold choices? What does this whole episode tell us about our own deep and often very personal relationship with the stories we've become so invested in? It's definitely a lot to consider. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.